Welcome back. Today we have another video coming at you on Dynasty Fantasy Football Fade the Field. As you're familiar with from last episode, we are covering the greatest fantasy football league on planet Earth here, the Lakeview Fantasy Football League. If you missed last video, go check it out. I was going through some of the settings of the league, giving you some context on the history of it all, and breaking down my own team. Today I'm going to be taking you through. We're going to be throwing it back to some of the former champions and the conditions that their team is in now. I'll tell you right now, they've taken different paths to get to that championship, and they've taken different paths after it as well. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it with the 2023 champion, the Average Joes. Here with the Average Joes, we can look at the quarterback room. We see Patrick Mahomes here, who he acquired in the offseason. We also see Sam Darnold and Dak Prescott holding down the bench for a three-quarterback keeper spot that you don't see very often in the LFFL. Moving on to running back, he is old with a Saquon and Derrick Henry core. He also has the upside of a J.K. Dobbins, depending on where he goes in free agency. I'm starting to get more and more out on him. The next rankings update I have will reflect that more accurately, but right now I'd say he's actually considered a hold. Moving on to his wide receiver room, we have CeeDee Lamb, Jaden Reed, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, Adam Thielen, and Jalen Nailor. This is more of his youth, more of his long-term upside group here. With some pieces I'm in on, pieces I'm out on. As you can see, there's a lot that I am right down the middle on, but a little bit higher than normal. On to the tight ends, we do have Travis Kelce holding down the starting lineup, and Cole Kmet coming off the bench. Moving on down to his buys versus sells versus holds, I am about 50-50 on holding his team, with a majority of the rest of the 50% leaning towards sells rather than buys. Maybe a team that should look to be a little bit more active in the offseason, but nothing too crazy. Here at his buy and sell targets, we're looking at the sell of Jaden Reed, Dak Prescott, and maybe even feeling out CeeDee Lamb. I have CD at my wide receiver 7 in my rankings, and there are several people that would give pluses on top of receivers I had ahead of him just to go get CeeDee Lamb. So I'd say to explore that. I understand he's a top asset and likely untouchable, but still, it's worth reaching out. I also have Dak Prescott for depth. Jaden Reed is the same case. If you can move off of Dak, even move into a pick like I have in his buys, a 2025, 2026 pick to a team that's quarterback needy, that's something I'm looking to do pretty much every time. Jaden Reed, as you know, I am not a big fan of the Packers wide receiver room at the moment, and Jaden Reed might be the person I am most scared of at his current value. If I can get a late first for him, I am sending that every single time. The only player I have in his buy target is David Njoku because I feel like he needs a tight end with a little bit more upside. So Cam, if you are watching this, come get David Njoku from me. But let's move on past that and my own personal plugs for trades I'd like, and let's talk about the draft capital. Very weak this year, but he did pick up some future again. He got a 2026 first in a trade recently, and he also picked up an extra 27 second recently. But outside of that, there's not a ton to show for draft capital, which you'll find out is pretty common in this league. I have him ranked 5th in general, just based on the amount of total value on his team, and I recommend he diversifies and competes. You can see in his running back room, he does have the age to compete right there. He has Mahomes, who's always going to give you a solid year. Maybe not the best upside, but definitely a high floor as well. You can see in his value distribution chart here, pretty even-keeled across the board, aside from the glaring hole at tight end, which is why I would recommend to go and try and get one of those guys below the top tier of the Bowers, McBride, Laporta. Go a little bit lower, maybe pick something up that'll help you spot win this year with Travis Kelce's future looming. Little notes, of course, aging tight end with a true guy. Capitalize on those values with Dak, maybe even exploring Darnold, and explore the tier down on CD. If you could even go down from CD to a Garrett Wilson type and get a nice plus on top of it, that's a move I also like to make every single time. Now that we're past the Average Joes, let's move on to the 2022 LFFL champion, Stroud 9. Of course, he didn't have that name back then. He was still rocking the good old J Nasty 12 as this team is managed by. Breaking down his team, we can take a peek at the starting lineup. We have CJ Stroud at quarterback, long-term value, lower point scoring upside. He has Ramondre Stevenson and Zach Charbonnet holding other running back spots as some lower-tiered options for him there. In the wide receiver slot, he has Chris Olave and Tank Dell. Olave, I am incredibly out on compared to consensus, and we will learn more on that in a future video. At his tight end spot, he's rolling out the Dynasty tight end one, undisputed #1 tight end, Brock Bowers. In his flex spots, he has Tyler Algier and Antonio Gibson. They're basically just spot fillers for him. We'll get to this big draft capital over here in a second. On the bench, he has J.J. McCarthy for another young quarterback. He is a big Michigan fan, so there might be a little bit of homer bias there. He also has depth of Audric Stime, Trey Tucker, Jalen Polk, Mike Williams, and Isaiah Likely. Breaking down his team and expected activity, there are a lot of guys on his team that are sitting in the lower area where consensus value is hard to find across different sites, but they are all sharing the opinion they are low. As you can see, most of these guys that I'm in the middle ground on, Algier, Gibson, Estime, Tucker, Polk, Mike Williams, are low value guys, best of them being a third. Then there's other guys like Charbonnet and Stroud, where I'm right at consensus, but that's just my opinion compared to others, so they sit right there in the middle ground. There's also a few sells on his team in Ramondre, Olave, and Tank Dell. I've already touched that I'm lower on Olave. I am in the same boat with Ramondre and Tank Dell as well. And in buys, people I like on his team, they're really just two, and it's not like they're high target buys. They're just great guys, feel like stashes, have potential upside, the ability to get out of them later on, and that's J.J. McCarthy and Isaiah Likely. Moving back up here, we can see some of his buy and sell targets, but I guess there's no point in going any further with this team without addressing this massive amount of draft capital he has here. He has, in this year's rookie draft alone, the 102, the 103, 105, 106, 108, 111, and 112. This team used to be more of a powerhouse, as you can guess, being the 2022 champion. And he's moved all of that now for a full-on tank rebuild here. He also has two 2026 firsts to contribute, a couple seconds, and his standard 2027 picks. For his team specifically, I'm looking at sell targets of the 108 and the 111. If you look statistically at the history of our drafts and the history of rookies in general in Dynasty, you are not going to go perfect no matter how much research you put in, how much time you put in, or how lucky you even get. 40% of first-round picks succeed in becoming a top 24 asset at the running back or wide receiver position, or a top 12 asset at the quarterback and tight end position. So I view his team as he should be moving off of those to try and contribute more. Still young guys to fit his timeline, but people that will be more secure and safe so this rebuild does not fall flat on its own face. I also have Chris Olave in here. I've touched on him a couple times already. I think he's extremely overvalued in the Dynasty committee. People to buy for him, I have Rashee Rice, who we will touch on later, Bucky Irving, and Kyron Williams. These are all younger players that could have a good spot on his roster. The two running backs you see there, they're more for the try and contend in the next 2 years window, whereas Rashee, I feel like, is a crazy upside for the future as well. League ranked, I have him 4th in the league overall, and as you can see from his chart down here, it is all draft picks. As you can see here, even this Brock Bowers line is dwarfed by how many draft picks he has and the total amount of value in that section. The notes I gave him for this is to just use the market value of the current first that he has, such as the 108, 111, 112, and move into more competitive players. Still maintain a constant core, though, of those young guys. I'm sure he's going to be looking to take shots on a Ted McMillan, Omarion Hampton, maybe slide in here Luther Bird and Emeka Egbuka, and continue to build his core out for the future. He already has Stroud to build around with it as well, along with Bauer, so he has 2 lower positions set. Now he just needs to fill in the gaps at flex, running back, and wide receiver. Moving on to the 2021 champ, Sacks Money Dub Squad. Now we've seen some very poor teams in this league. We have not seen a team in this bad of a situation ever before. He has youth at quarterback. He has Caleb starting for him and Anthony Richardson coming off the bench. But the running back room is atrocious. There's not a single player here on his running back room. It's valued at more than a 4th-round pick. Moving towards his wide receivers, he does have Keon Coleman. That's a bright spot. It was his first-rounder last year. But past that, he has Alec Pierce, Rashid Shaheed, Gabe Davis, Kendrick Bourne, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and that is it. There's also no value there outside of Keon Coleman. At the tight end room, he has Dalton Schultz sitting there as the only option he's a waiver wire guy. He's a spot start if you need him. He's not the consistent guy for his future. Looking at his graph, it's very mixed, and this truthfully comes from the lack of value on his team. If there's a guy that's low and I'm very high on them, that high still won't get you very much above value. But since there's so many players that are valued in that 3rd round, 4th round, even late 2nd range, it's very easy to be high on someone compared to consensus there. He also has a fair amount of sells on his team and the same amount of holds on his team as buys. This team is just in a rough spot with a ton of value depletion, and this rebuild will take a long time. Some of the sell targets I have, if you can get a 3rd-round pick for any of these 3 guys to take a shot in this year's draft or any draft, I am taking that in an instant. He maintains his own 1st-round pick for next year, so this is a team that does not want to be good. He wants the best shot at the 101 next year that he can get, so he can be scouting out prospects for that year. Buy targets for him, I also have 2025 picks, 2026 picks, and a boom potential wide receiver. This team needs to pick up as many picks as possible to show signs of hope for the future. And the boom potential wide receiver, if you could also turn around and take a shot on a guy for a 3rd rounder, for a 4th rounder, or even any of these pieces that's a young asset, think Quentin Johnston, think Cedric Tillman, guys in that nature, it's worth that risk to take on the upside that could come with. Moving down to draft capital here, he does have a 1st-rounder this year and a pair of 2nds. He also has 309 in this year's draft, and he has the ability to make something happen in those picks. He can take some shots on running backs, but I advise him to take shots on positions that will maintain their value for a long time. If he was lucky enough to get a Tyler Warren to slip to him at the 110, I believe that's a great pick with his long-term upside. If he can take shots on running backs and hope for a quick value bump to sell off mid-season this year, here at the 211 or 212, I'm fine with that as well. And at the 309, I am recommending he targets a quarterback to try and accrue value on that 3rd-round pick compared to the abysmal hit rate of 3rd-round picks at flex positions as well. His league rank is 14th, dead last in the entire league, and I would love to see him go on this long-winded rebuild. All of his value is set into draft picks. But although this chart looks very familiar to Stroud 9, who we covered last team, he does not have the total amount of value here. On my scale, I have numeric values applied to every single player, every single asset. And you can see his is sitting right here around 11,000, comparing that to Stroud 9, whose draft picks are sitting there around 32,000, 33,000 instead. You can see this team has some work. The notes I gave, this is a real rough spot, and it will take a long time to rebuild and get back to championship form. But just be patient, stick true to it, try and trade as much as you can to get small value wins. Those could help you out a ton in the long run. If you want to avoid your team being in this bad of condition and you want your own team breakdown, reach out to me on Twitter at KeenBryan. You will be able to get custom team advice based on your league settings, your league values, and other factors going on in your league. Please reach out, save yourself from the issues that Sax Money Dub Squad is currently going through. Now, right back into the content. Moving on to 2020, we have the Dream Team and Team of the Head Commissioner. Now, this team does look fantastic right now if the year was about 2021. And unfortunately for the manager, RK Boomer, these came up short now in 3 separate championship games. He lost to me in a thriller of a Monday night game this year. He lost to Cameron Gilbert and the Average Joes in 2023, and he lost to Sax Money Dub Squad in 2021. Past all of his pain and suffering he's had to go through, he does still have a very good roster now. He has Josh Allen, the consensus QB1, my QB2. It's hard to separate him and Lamar in my mind. At the running back room, he's improved. He picked up Tyrone Tracy this offseason. He also has Alvin Kamara holding it down as an aging veteran. Same thing goes with Christian McCaffrey. At the wide receiver spot, he has Brian Thomas Jr., Tyreek Hill, and Jameson Williams. Now, he is a Lions guy. He's a homer for Jameson Williams. But I advise, as you can see over here, him to move off of JMO to try and get him to another Lions fan in this league. Outside of that, he has Mark Andrews, my tight end 4. And on the bench, we're looking at values of Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Kendre Miller, Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, Jalen Coker, and Javon Baker holding down his taxi spot. Now, as I always advise, there's a hard amount of sells compared to buys on this team, and holds are just, there's quite a few, but that comes from some consensus guys like Josh Allen. That's always going to be around the same rankings. And then there's some other veterans that I'm about even on compared to market. So I would recommend this team gets active during the offseason, tries to trade around, make as many moves that are successful as he can. Looking at the draft capital, he has the 114, a 4th round pick. He also has some extra future draft capital and an additional 2026 second, an additional 2026 third, and he does remain with all of his 2027 picks. Some buy targets for this team. You will see Rashee Rice a few times on this list. I am significantly higher on him than consensus, and I believe he's a great buy, one of the best buys you could get in Dynasty right now. I also have him buying 2026 draft capital to try and add a second timeline to his team to go with the Tyreek Hills, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffreys that are trying to push for a contention now to give him a stable foundation to build on for the future once those guys are out of the league here in 3 years or so. I'm also very high on Tony Pollard. I think that Tyjae Spears has not shown enough to take that backfield over, and it's Pollard's job to lose. Selling, I have him selling off some of his depth wide receivers, guys that aren't in the starting lineup, aren't valuable enough to be, in order to gain some more of that pick capital, maybe some more youth to take shots on. That is why I put his suggested path at contend and extend. The contention aspect I touched on was Christian McCaffrey. The extension is that foundation, which I touched on as well. He does have a very even value distribution chart by position. He is lacking a little bit at tight end and quarterback, but he is only rostering one of those to keep his options open at the flex, so that's very understandable. His draft picks are a little bit low, but when so many draft picks are hoarded by specific teams, it's really tough to get your hands on good ones. The notes I had on this is to capitalize on this current championship window he has with McCaffrey, with Kupp, with Tyreek, and not move those guys. Instead, move on, extend that window for some depth and a younger core to build in the future. Moving on to the 2019 and the first champion of the LFFL, since there was no existence before that because redraft championships do not count in our league. He has a team that I like quite a bit. I'm high on Kyler and Tua, both of his quarterbacks. Then he has a running back room with Brees and Monty sitting there. He also has the depth of Pacheco, which I'm far out on Pacheco, but I know it's one of his favorite players. The wide receiver room is really where you'll find this guy making all the money. He has wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 13, and that is 4 wide receiver 1s by this league standard in Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, Rashi, and A.J. Brown. He also has the depth piece of DJ Moore down there and also DeAndre Hopkins. So he has top end and he has a couple lower guys that I am out on personally. Looking to the tight end room, he has Dallas Goedert and Evan Ingram. Ingram's signing to Denver is very exciting, but I don't think it's a groundbreaking achievement. He'll be a great spot start, flopping in and out with Dallas Goedert. Maybe hope for a Luke Musgrave breakout, you never know. This is a team that I recommend be a little bit more passive in the offseason. There's no need to start forcing trades on guys when you have a team that's very high compared to consensus. He is the first team, I believe, outside of my own, that has more buys than holds or sells. Moving ahead, we can come check out some of his sell targets. You'll see it right away. DJ Moore, Isaiah Pacheco, and some future picks. So as you can see, he does have a decent amount of depth in the seconds, decent amount in the thirds. He also has 2027 picks that he can move on from. Moving over towards his buy targets, Brian Robinson just as a depth running back. This team is in need of some depth, with Pacheco likely losing that job here in the draft or with a shocker in free agency late. I also have Drake May on here as another quarterback. You like Kyler. Tua is okay at price, but if you can get a real difference maker for the long haul, that's about the only position that's lacking here outside of tight end. I also threw Josh Jacobs because I believe that team that owns Josh Jacobs, which we'll get to later, is a team that I think is looking to sell off and launch their own rebuild. So I think that'd be a great third head for the monstrous RB room that could be created here. Now, I know last video I said I was second in the league, but trade has happened. He's now moved his rank up to second. Him and I are neck and neck sitting there. And if you look at his value distribution chart, the only room we've covered so far that has this much value has been Stroud9's draft picks. So his wide receiver room is absolutely loaded down. I advise, of course, to move off of one of those and DJ Moore, but I know that's another one of the favorites on that team, so that will not happen. I would recommend upgrading at tight end, upgrading at quarterback, like I said, and you can see that from the graph with the small sizes of those compared to the other rooms. A couple notes I threw on. I said to consolidate picks into upgraded players, maybe mix in a couple picks with DJ Moore, see if you can't get up into the high wide receiver 2 range. I don't think you'll be able to get into the low wide receiver 1, but there's always a chance. I also said to acquire RB depth. There is always injuries that can happen in the LFFL, especially when you're dealing with running back with injury history like Brees, like Monty, and Pacheco's big injury last year that still could be holding him back now. I also said to use the depth. Take shots on young guys at this point. You have a team that can compete for 3 years or so before the core of it starts to fall out on itself. Maybe a little bit shorter with Brees Hall and David Montgomery's questionable futures at that point, but you should still be able to compete at that time anyways. Use your depth pieces to take shots on young assets. There's plenty of room to go get a young talent or even draft picks in this current year just to sit on, maybe pick up a running back here, wide receiver there, and have that second timeline built up and ready for when the cliff happens on these guys. All right, guys. Thank you again for tuning into another video with us. Our next one, we will cover the remaining teams that have not been touched on in this league. Maybe a longer video, but I know you guys like the content. So we'll keep it up, keep it moving, and I will see you guys in the next one.